On this episode of the show, I have with me Matt Buckleman. He is co-founder and CTO at Hone Health, and we're going to be talking about, well, a little bit of his voyage with AI in the SDLC. We're going to talk about where he's at with that, what the current SDLC looks like, where he's seen some opportunities to take advantage of some of these tools out there within the development process, and hopefully he'll share us, some insights as to what he's learned and where he thinks this will go, and a few other things in between. Matt, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. All right, before we start, tell us what Hone Health does.
Hone Health was founded in 2020 by myself and three other folks. And we started first really focused entirely on men's hormone optimization and to launch a telehealth platform and service focused in that area. And the idea at first, particularly this was during COVID, was to start the voyage for our patients with an at-home test rather than having to go to the lab. And that has evolved over time where we've now launched two other verticals where there's a men's longevity offering as well as a women's longevity offering. And then in order to broaden the lab panels, we now offer folks the opportunity to go to a local lab so we can offer more treatment options. So it's been quite an adventure starting a telemedicine company at the beginning of COVID, not knowing that COVID was starting at the time that we started it. So there's been a lot of pivots and stops and starts, but it's been a really awesome journey, and we're very grateful for the success we've had.
Awesome. That sounds like a story in and of itself. This episode, yeah, absolutely. This episode, obviously, we're going to be talking a little bit about the software development lifecycle and specifically, how things are going. I know you mentioned when we spoke last that obviously you guys are leveraging some AI tools and whatnot. So maybe to start us off, if you could kind of give us a little overview of what the SDLC looks like and give us a little bit of a starting point, and then we'll see what you're doing with some of those AI tools.
Sure. So we are a Azure shop in terms of our infrastructure, and our backend applications are written in .NET and C#, and then we have the standard set of front-end apps written in React, Next.js, and standard single-page application frameworks. We use Azure DevOps for all of our work tracking, and I think we took the out-of-the-box Agile workflow template that they have in there, Agile or Scrum, and made some minor customizations. And for us, what our SDLC looks like has kind of been a very fluid thing. I've traditionally been a very anti-dogma person when it comes to software development lifecycle. I've never really bought fully into, Scrum exactly as it's prescribed is the way to go, or Lean, or XP, or XYZ methodology. I think folks might tend to get really caught up in, we have to have a stand-up every day at the same time, and it has to be 10 minutes long, and we need to do story pointing through planning poker, and things get very caught up in the details, whereas I feel like the real idea is take an idea, break it up into small pieces, and get it out to people as fast as you can to get feedback. And to try to do that on some sort of iterative cycle so that you can learn as much as possible, as quickly as possible. Because what we end up building is never, ever what we intend on building. I think anybody that's been building anything for any length of time knows there's never been one case in the history of software everybody sat down and you wrote a spec doc and you said, this is great. You laid out your sprints and then they all went how you thought they were going to. Somewhere around the 70% mark, everything else that you thought you were going to do isn't what you ended up doing anyway. So we try to buy a lot into being really flexible, almost anticipating the fact that we don't know what we're doing, and not to do so recklessly, but to be really confident in our direction and our strategy. And be flexible in how we get there, because there's a lot of outside influences that could change that. For us, in the world of healthcare and telemedicine, that has been a constant push and pull from outside forces since 2020. COVID caused certain regulations, for example, to be temporarily suspended, and then the government would say, hey, we're going to bring them back. No, we're not. I think we are, and they might look like this. And so you have to be kind of really adaptive. And I kind of apply that to how we work internally too, which is how we construct our teams has kind of evolved from a very, very rudimentary, crude process early on to where we are now. And the short version of that history is for quite a few years, it was myself and two or three other engineers. I had a VP named John Marhefka, who I need to give a shout out to because I've known John since he was 19. We worked together at my last company. He actually started there as an intern, and we sat next to each other for like 5 years and worked together for another 10 after that. And I was really fortunate that he came to join me. But it was myself, John, and a couple of other folks. And we weren't at a place as an organization to have really thought through roadmaps and priority lists and elaborate processes. It was just kind of building the plane as you fly it a little bit with clarity around our direction and where we wanted to land. And we've now grown, and it's ironic that we're meeting today because we had our team call today that we haven't had in a little while. And I realized that I had like 34 people in my technology call today. And I don't think I realized that I had 34 people working in our department at this point in time. I mean, I did, but then you see them all in one place. When you're virtual, it's not something that happens all the time. And it kind of causes you to take a step back and go, wow, this is a lot different than three of us working off of basically Slack being our prioritized work list, right? And where we are now, which is a lot more elaborate. So where we are today is that we have what I'll call a couple of different streams of work. And one of the other philosophies that I've found to be really useful is things that require more time and that are like a bigger part of your roadmap and your product. They tend to get interrupted and disrupted for a few of the same reasons that we all struggle with all the time. And so one of them is unexpected interruptions because of critical issues or changes in the regulatory environment. So what we try to do is we keep what we call kind of our feature and roadmap teams focused on some of the bigger things that we know might take a couple of sprints to a couple of months to get out the door. Generally don't like trying to work on anything longer than that before people have seen it and touched it, because otherwise you can end up in the wrong place. And then we have what we call kind of our knockout teams that are working on a very Kanban first item on the top item on the list, grab it, work on it. That list is being prioritized constantly with the business, kind of on a standing frequency once a week, but sometimes urgently as needed. And that allows us to maintain cadence on two fronts without having to worry about those last minute things pulling off teams that are working on something longer term.
And I guess as I mean, it's interesting when you finally do put sight to the team size. That's got to be a good moment as well. I guess when you're looking, when you're looking at the team size, and I'm sure as a CTO, you're paying attention to the market for all the various tools that are out there to help augment code. We'll call it augment code because there's so many that do so many different things. I guess have you? I guess you have. I'll answer that question. You have been thinking about it. I guess tell us where you've potentially seen some opportunities to incorporate that within your within the software development lifecycle.
It's a great question, and I think one of the reasons why I mentioned something about the size is that in getting to where we are now, something that I've realized, and I think I knew it, but I more intentionally thought about it recently, was I don't know that you ever get quite as much done as you do when you just have like 5 people focused entirely on one thing in those early days, because as the number of people grows, the amount of overhead spent organizing, communicating, collaborating, coordinating, maintaining starts taking up a bigger percent of the time that you're spending. And when you're small, it's just people executing. And there's just a level of efficiency in that. And I think we've all experienced that at some level, right? And then you get bigger and, the kind of things have to change. And today, as we're growing, obviously the first thing we ask ourselves is, well, why are we growing and what do we need more of? And is there something in terms of AI that could do all of that for us or some of that for us? And we've probably about a year and a half ago, we and some of the technology leaders, we really started focusing ourselves on evaluating and trying the latest tools as they became available, kind of looking around the corner to see what might be coming so that we could prepare like how we work for those tools. And I think that's one topic we can come back to, but I think there's just like building the core parts of an application allow you to build new things in the future more easily because you've kind of got a solid foundation. I think the same things apply with how you work. If you've got terrible traceability in your requirements in your current code, AI tools are going to be really limited in their ability to write good code for your system. They might be able to generate a new little applet for you or something, but writing production code that follows your standards and follows all of your current patterns is something that I found them to be challenged at doing unless you've got the right context to give them and what they're looking at is consistent and easily followed. And they can kind of be prompted in a way that makes them, I guess, generate code that's close to that of what your developer would write.
I was going to ask you, and you brought up a good point there. Someone mentioned to me a long time ago that you judge expertise generally across the board by the types of questions people ask. You can discern who's an expert and who's not. We were talking about the Tour de France before the show. I watch it. I've never ridden it, so I only have limited context. I can't tell you past a certain, but you do ride extensively, and you would get into some specifics of how the body feels that I would not have context. You are the expert. I'm a spectator who watches. So when it comes to prompting, when it comes to looking at software engineers using these tools, I know a lot's been made up of the junior level coders are having a hard time finding a job. They might not be necessary. And the tool in the hand of experts, people who are already seasoned, who know those questions, it kind of shines in their hands more. Is that a case of, and maybe this is a two-part question, is that a case of right now with the tool set, that's how we view things? Or is that a case of with an LLM, prompting is a game of understanding those nuances?
That's a really great question. I think it's both, probably. So I think that there's two parts of that I think about kind of all the time. And I'm going to start with the second part first, which is I consider myself a pretty strong expert in, let's say, SQL. I've been working with SQL since like 1995. I've written tens of millions of queries probably at this point. I've designed and architected extremely complex databases. I feel like I can write it in my sleep. And it comes to me very easily, and usually something that's really complicated I can get through really quickly. So a couple of months ago, I decided to start trying out Cursor for SQL writing, for ad hoc queries, for various data pools, sometimes just my own exploratory analysis, helping a developer with something. And it was simultaneously amazing and awful. And I was able to ask it extremely well, I guess, informed questions. So I knew what to ask it for help with. And even how, if I look at what it wanted to autocomplete things with, or if I asked it how to do basic things, without it actually having a really clear understanding of our schema, everything that it generated was based on assumptions from the queries you had written with it to date. Now, we are, might dare even say, like religiously consistent with database naming conventions and stuff. I dare to say you probably won't find a place as committed to consistency as we are, because I've just learned consistency is everything. And I would rather do something a way I don't like or that isn't maybe even not ideal, but it's the same way everywhere than have it be 10 different pretty good ways, because that's a mess to deal with. And I found that the tool was really almost slowed me down at the end of the day, because it wasn't able to create and write SQL statements that use the right table names and column names, something as simple as that. Logically, the structure of the SQL that it would generate was great. It knew when to use common table expressions or when to use an inner join or an outer join. It knew how to do all of that, but it didn't have the specifics it needed to be really accurate at it. Now, if you flip that, and this is something that we've started to play with recently, where a lot of these tools now you can go point to your own instance of Azure OpenAI services, or with Claude and Cursor, I think it's Anthropic, you can do, I forget what they call it, your own, I think an API endpoint, and they call it like a project. You can give that project some instructions, and then you can point Cursor, for example, at that. Theoretically, what that would allow you to do is say, all right, well, I can update that project or that prompt through an API. I could have it every time that there's a release that goes out that changes and updates our schema. It pushes that out to the knowledge store for that prompt. And now, potentially, Cursor is going to actually give me recommendations and auto completions and all of that based on the actual schema of my database, not on whatever thing it thinks that thing should be named or is named. I don't know if I've explained that point very well, because it's been something I've been playing with lately, but I was actually at the end of the day very surprised and a little disappointed to discover this is not as helping me as much as if I flipped it. And I kind of did a test, because I was doing a lot of data work over a period of like 2 weeks. I was building a pretty complicated core clinical data model for our Fabric Lakehouse that was going to serve basically as the basis of some really extensive AI tools around clinical recommendations and even some potential like clinical white papers and stuff. And SQL Server Management Studio with a tool called SQL Prompt, which has been around forever. It's made by Redgate. I've used it since like 2005. That was more useful to me than Claude, because I didn't need help understanding how to join tables together or like that kind of thing. What I needed was something that got a sense for, as I was typing, what I was probably doing. And SQL Prompt was able to do that with a lot more accuracy.
Are you seeing opportunities for the team to offload some of the stuff that is overhead to their day? Is there opportunities? Is the tool set starting to mature to go, hey, listen, these are things that we know, this AI coding generating tool, whatever version you're working with, it helps offload some of those quote unquote busy activities that developers might not like as well.
Yeah. And that's where I see the most immediate benefit, which is, if I just think about my day to day as a developer and the things that I do that developers tend to not like to do. And I mentioned earlier traceability. My developers get probably annoyed with me from time to time, because I'm a big believer of like, when you commit your code, the comment that comes along with that commit should be pretty informative about what the change does, and have us be written in a standard format that makes it reference the work items that whatever system you're using for work tracking. And the old days, that might have been literally typing in the ticket number with a colon afterwards as your quote unquote standard. There wasn't any sort of automatic association, but something that lets someone weeks or years from now look at it and know what that was written for, and then be able to go find the ticket and see more context behind it. Developers tend to write comments like fixed bug, did cure, added new field. That's not something that is necessarily very descriptive. And I have found like that little thing. Well, now with, for example, Visual Studio with like GitHub Copilot, like they change the name of it all the time, GitHub Copilot Chat or whatever it is these days, it can generate some really nice, thoughtful comments about what your changes are without you having to think about it, and much better than you would have probably come up with on your own. And that seems like a really tiny thing, but the couple of minutes that's saving you is actually probably more than a couple of minutes if you were to have done it the right way to begin with. Will, I think, accumulate over time to save time every time people are going back to look at what that code does and understand it. And I think that actually also applies to in .NET. There's an official term for it. I call it the // comments, which basically a special comment type that you can decorate your APIs with so that it's automatically can generate Swagger and Open API documentation, right? Another thing that developers are famously good at forgetting to do. And they're also famously good at wishing that there was better documentation for the API, which is one of the great things about being a developer. We always complain about the things that we could solve ourselves, but we generally don't do a very good job of. And when I say the developers, I'm including me in that, by the way. That's another area where if you had built a new API controller and you've written 8 or 10 new endpoints and there's a lot of complex logic to it, let's say, especially if maybe you've been grinding on it all weekend and the release is coming up, it's more than likely you're not going to sit down and write really great descriptive comments on what every argument is and what the return types are and what each of the endpoints do. And again, these LLMs were trained on text, and they're really, really good at doing stuff with text. And that's the type of thing where I've seen them take something that developers would either just avoid doing altogether or do quickly and do a bad job of, and make it something that they not only do well, but as we get further into the discussion where I think like the big benefit is where you start to look at these things as something that are like acting as agents that are part of your workflow, where you've got something grabbing every pull request before it even gets to a dev branch and just adding that stuff for you. And I've tested it a handful of times enough to know at this point that we could say, well, yeah, we should probably review it and approve it before we let it automatically generate comments. But what I've looked at it do so far is better than what people were doing. So sure, we can look at it, but we're not going to find any errors probably because it's writing something that's better out of the gate than even our own proofread comments would be.
I guess maybe a final question, and this is something I think a lot of people go through is and you're testing tools, which is exactly what you should be doing at this stage and trying to see what helps the team. Who is ultimately responsible for being included in that testing process? And then what's the decision making look like to go, all right, well, we found a tool I think we like and we want to expand the use case. Is it an incremental thing? Is it hey, let's all just dive in and use it and see how it goes? How does that process look?
It's a really great question. And I am, for better or worse, I have historically been the type of technology leader that has at times frustrated my people by when they ask me who's responsible for that kind of thing, I say, you are. And then they say, well, what do you mean? Him or me? And I'm like, all of you. And I do look at it as like a shared responsibility, like documentation, or there's a security vulnerability that we've learned about, or a new way of doing things. Like it's everyone's responsibility to kind of share ownership of the code and our work product and to make it better. And I expect folks to be keeping an eye on what the latest tooling does. And when they identify something that's really great, bring it to the group, be like, check this out. This is awesome. And I expect other folks to say, well, hold on a second. It's actually really terrible at this. There's the A, B, and C problem that we should check out first. And for that to kind of almost have, I hate using the term, happen organically within the team. Now, there tend to be a smaller group of kind of some more senior folks that tend to spearhead those types of things. They've got their eyes on those things the most often. But that's generally our approach for that kind of thing, where somebody says, this looks pretty awesome. I went and checked it out. Here's a little demo. We do hackathons twice a year, and usually there's a couple of teams during the hackathons that they're doing something with processes and tooling. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's our head architect. And one of the things that's changed recently is, a year and a half ago, I had John working for me running engineering, a little more than a year and a half, and senior data person, but I had no other leadership roles at all filled out underneath of me. And I now have John and a head of enterprise architecture and someone running data and analytics and machine learning and somebody running product and design. And so you've got more leaders who are kind of keeping an eye on those things. To give you a concrete example, something we talked about on the phone was I had actually felt like the stuff where the coding tools are great. They're really useful. They're actually amazing at writing new code, like outside your current system. So if you need to write a little app to go do something or prototype something, they're amazing at it. I think there's still work to do about them writing production code that integrates well with what you've got, especially if you've got a really big system. So I actually focused on the other side of the software development lifecycle, which was like requirements and user stories and acceptance criteria and work tracking and all of that kind of thing, because those assets and artifacts are documents generally to start with. And that's what these models are really, really good at. And I think I told you I was playing around with the proof of concept. And I did get it working. And the short version of it is that our epics and Azure DevOps, we associate, there's a field in there that says, hey, where's the link to the spec doc? It's a Google Doc. And we've got something now that basically when it sees that there's a spec doc and an epic and it's ready to go, it grabs the spec doc. This is in a Fabric Python notebook. I wanted to learn Python too, so that was one of the reasons why I did it in Python. Grabs the spec doc, pulls it down, runs it, and hands it off to an Azure agent, and it hands it to a series of agents using Azure's AI Foundry services. And the first thing it does, it says, take a look at this spec doc. Is it good or not? What's it missing? Where is it light? And here are all of our meeting transcripts and meeting notes, which are now we have meetings about projects. There's no reason not to take transcripts for every meeting that anyone ever has, because that data is going to be priceless with these models. It takes those transcripts and it says, here's all the discussions we had about it. Here's our final product. What do you see? And generally, it's been really great at saying, well, you talk about state level regulations 13 times in this document, and there are none of the actual regulations listed anywhere, but you just keep mentioning that they're important parts of what you need to develop. Oh, that's really important. We should probably go flesh that out. And it's really good at taking and distilling and coalescing, I should say, all of the different conversations that happen in requirements meetings. And I think we've all been in those, right? Every meeting about the project starts with the same 3 questions that you started with last time, where you're trying to remind yourselves like, well, where did we land with that? And then you kind of have it again. So it's really good at getting that document to a better place without having to spend any time. It's just something that could happen in the background. And if we're intentional and thoughtful about how we do things like tag meetings in Google Calendar and documents, this stuff could all happen in the background automatically for us. After it's said, this document looks pretty good, it takes that, and we did a lot of prompting and playing around with it. And it takes that document and it breaks it down into features, user stories, and acceptance criteria, which is something that product owners and folks they hate doing, and anyone would. It's kind of this weird combination of copying and pasting along with some sort of filtering, because it's not a one-for-one copy. And what we found is that its output is not what the teams would love to have out of the gate. It's going to take a couple of iterations of using it, but it saves a lot of time because it happens in 2 minutes. And it comes up with better acceptance criteria than our best product people were writing. And it, again, does it in no time. And it hasn't even been fed the information that I think could make it great, which is like all of the systems, if you can close the loop in the system, I think its capacity to be better over time increases tremendously. In this case, I think what that looks like is actually maybe pretty straightforward, which is as simple as when the project comes to an end, you come back to the model and say, well, here was the original spec document. And here's all of the work that actually got completed. Maybe here's the stories and features you suggested that we start with. And then here's what we actually created, the bugs that happened and the things that ran over schedule and the things that started as 3 story points and ended up as 20 and yada, yada, yada. And make that kind of this continual repository of information that can be fed back to it to make it better at generating a set of work items for the teams to work off of. And I think if you make the loop close like that, what you can do is get product folks able to be focused where they need to be, which is like hands-on with their 2 audiences, which is like the toughest job about being a product person. They've got to understand all these complexities about the business, and then they've got to deal with a developer telling them it's going to take 7 months to build, and they don't understand, and it's nuanced, and it's hard, and you don't get it, and yada, yada, yada. They can spend more of that time actually connecting those dots, building the relationships there, creating empathy in both directions, because I think that's really important, and less time just kind of muddling through these big documents and trying to break them down into something that ultimately they don't do that work anyway. So it's not going to come naturally to them. And it's something that I think LLMs don't have a lot of ways to go to get good at. The tooling doesn't have a lot of ways to go to get good at Google Docs or reformatting documents or proofreading them or even generating them. So I think that's one of the things that I was hopeful about when we last talked, and we've actually now seen is been really effective. And so my latest prototype is now to say, well, where else is document-like content and a lot of text taking place in the software development space, in the SDLC, I should say. And my feeling was all the Slack conversations that the teams are having and all of the updates and tickets. I used to know everything that was going on because there was 3 of us, and it was like, hey, what's going on? And then you knew. And now it's getting a lot more difficult. There's a lot more happening. So I was just curious what would happen, and it was amazing how fast it is to stand up these agents and interact with them through API now. So I have something that grabs every update happening in our work tracking system, every commit, every comment, every work item ticket creation, update, every bug report, everything like that. And it just dumps it into a really silly, simple document database. And then I have a couple of agents that, one takes every comment being written and it analyzes it on 5 sentiments, like mood, workflow state, blocked or not, is it idle, and is it requiring action from someone else? Oh, and then the standard positive, negative, neutral sentiment. And then it takes all of those updates that it then gave sentiment scores to, and it takes every one of the comments that it's now got sentiment for, and it starts aggregating them and then finding patterns or risks. And it's an early version, but I think it's close to something now where I now can look at this thing once a week, or I can look at it as often as I want. And it's pretty good at saying, like, this is not going so well. I know, like, it seems like it's okay, but there's a lot of X sentiment happening within this project right now. We had something 2 weeks ago where it said you have one engineer who's got 7 or 8 items that have been sent to him by teams because they needed his expertise and review. Like, he's becoming a bottleneck for you. And he's the kind of guy that's just going to do it. He'll work all weekend and get it done, and you won't hear about it, and which is great, right? but it noticed that. And I was looking at it with John and we were like, huh. Now, like anecdotally, I'm thinking back over Slack over the last week and I'm like, oh, you know what? There were 8 or 10 things that got sent to him and that happened over a period of time where neither of us really noticed it. Again, patterns in text and things like that are what these models are absolutely amazing at. And quite frankly, in my mind, just better than people because they can consume volumes of information much better than we can. So, as excited as I am as an engineer about what these tools are going to do for coding, I think they've helped me write prototypes really, really fast. I think you still have to be a good engineer to get the most out of them. And to your original question about what does the junior developer do? I would say understand the fundamentals of your craft really well, and then use every tool that is coming out as much as you can to understand it. But it's the quote unquote softer side that I think's got the more immediate stuff that I see potential in.
I definitely think people are going to have questions on this episode. If somebody does want to reach out to you to ask a follow-up, what's a good way of connecting with you?
Old school email's fine. mbuckleman@homehealth.com. Or they can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Matt, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing with us. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate your time. Thanks a lot for having me.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, 2 things. One, hopefully you'll definitely share this episode with others because I think as we're talking about engineering teams leveraging AI, Matt in this case has gone through a lot of effort and due diligence and time learning where to apply some of these tools to his team and his process, and hopefully this will benefit others by listening to it. So please share this away. Really appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.